The first time Adai's Chukwuemeka stood outside Obiora Namdi's gate, her hands trembled so badly, she almost dropped the small basket of chin-chin she had brought as a gift, and beside her, gripping her fingers tightly, stood her 6-year-old niece Zuriel, a bright-eyed deaf girl who had already lost both her parents and now looked up at the stranger's house as though it held the answer to a question only she could ask. Adais had rehearsed this moment for 3 days. She had practiced how she would explain, gently and without shame, that she was not just a woman looking for love, but a woman who came as a package, an aunt who had become a mother, overnight when her younger sister died in a car accident on the Lekki-Epe Expressway, leaving behind a daughter who could not hear the world but who understood it more deeply than most people who could. Adais had raised Zuriel for 2 years now, teaching herself sign language from cracked phone screens and library books, learning to speak with her hands the way she once spoke with her mouth. She had told herself she was done with romance, that no man in Lagos would want a woman burdened with a child who was not even biologically hers. But her friend Ngozi had insisted, practically dragged her into this arrangement, saying that Obiora was different, that he ran a small furniture workshop in Yaba and had a reputation for patience that bordered on saintly. The gate creaked open before Adais could knock, and there he was, Obiora Namdi, a broad-shouldered man in a simple white kaftan, sawdust still clinging faintly to his forearms as though he had rushed straight from his workshop, his eyes crinkling with a warmth that made Adaisi's carefully rehearsed speech evaporate from her mind entirely. He looked first at her, then down at Zuriel, and Adais felt her stomach clench, bracing herself for the flicker of hesitation, the polite but distant smile that Lagos men so often wore when confronted with complications they had not signed up for. If this story of quiet, courage, and unexpected love is already moving something in your heart, take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, share it with someone who still believes in kindness and second chances, and subscribe to Whispering Tales Stories so you never miss the next journey we walk together. Obiora crouched down slowly, bringing himself to Zuriel's eye level, something no man had ever bothered to do in the 2 years since Adais had taken her in. Most people either ignored the child entirely or spoke loudly and slowly at her as though volume could somehow break through silence, but Obiora simply looked at her, patient and unhurried, waiting. Zuriel studied him the way children do, without pretense, her small head tilting slightly as she took in the lines of his face, and then, without any prompting from Adais, her hands moved through the air in the careful, deliberate motions Adais had taught her. She touched her fingers gently near her own eyes, then curved her hand outward in the sign for kindness, her small fingers shaping the words with a certainty that startled everyone present. Adisi's breath caught in her throat because she knew immediately what her niece had said, a phrase Zuriel used rarely and only for people she trusted completely. He has kind eyes. Adais quickly began to explain, her voice tumbling out too fast, telling Obiora that Zuriel had said he seemed kind, and she watched his face for any sign of discomfort, any indication that this unexpected introduction to sign language and silent judgment had been too much for a first meeting. Instead, Obiora's eyes filled with something unexpected, a tenderness that seemed to catch even him off guard, and he asked quietly how he might say thank you back to her. Adais showed him the sign, and Obiora, this large man with sawdust on his hands and calluses, built from years of carving wood into furniture, awkwardly formed the gesture with his fingers, getting it slightly wrong, and Zuriel giggled, a sound that came out strange and unmodulated, the way laughter does for those who have never heard their own voice, but a sound of pure delight nonetheless. She reached up and adjusted his fingers herself, correcting his hand shape with the patient authority of a teacher, and something in Adaisi's chest, some tightly wound fear she had carried since her sister's funeral, began to loosen. The afternoon unfolded slowly under the wide Lagos sky, golden light filtering through the almond trees that lined Obiora's compound, and what was supposed to be a brief, awkward introduction stretched into hours. Obiora showed Zuriel his workshop, guiding her small hands over the smooth curves of a half-finished chair, letting her feel the vibrations of his tools through the wood so she could experience his craft in the only way available to her. Adais watched from the doorway, arms crossed, still guarded despite herself, still waiting for the moment when the novelty would wear off and he would remember that this was not the simple courtship he might have imagined when Ngozi first suggested the meeting. She had been disappointed before by men who smiled at Zuriel in greeting and then, weeks later, began asking pointed questions about whether Adais intended to raise the child forever, whether there might be other arrangements, other family members who could take on that responsibility instead. But Obiora asked no such questions that day. Instead, as the sun began its slow descent toward the rooftops of Yaba, painting the compound in amber and rust, he asked Adesi quietly if he could learn more signs, not out of curiosity or performance, but because, in his words, if he was going to know this family, he wanted to know all of it, not just the parts that were easy. Adis felt tears prick at her eyes, and she turned away quickly, embarrassed by how deeply his simple sentence had cut through years of accumulated defense. She had spent 2 years bracing for rejection, building walls around herself and Zuriel both. And here was a man dismantling those walls not with grand gestures but with small, deliberate patience, the same patience he brought to shaping raw wood into something beautiful. Over the following weeks, Obiora became a fixture in their lives in ways so gradual that Adais almost did not notice until it had already happened. He learned the sign for good morning, then for hungry, then for a whole vocabulary of small domestic words that let him communicate directly with Zuriel without needing Adais as translator. He built Zuriel a small wooden stool for her 7th birthday, carved with butterflies along its edges because she had once signed to him that she loved anything that could fly, since she imagined flying must feel like the silence she lived in, weightless and free rather than empty. Adais watched him kneel beside her niece countless evenings, the two of them communicating in a language he had learned purely out of love, and she began to understand that the family she had feared no man would accept was, to Obiora, not a burden at all, but a gift he had not known he was searching for. There were hard days too, days when Zuriel's frustration at the world's inaccessibility boiled over into tears that could not be soothed with words, and Adais watched to see whether Obiora would falter, whether the difficulty of loving a child with such particular needs would eventually wear thin. Instead, he stayed, sitting on the floor beside Zuriel through her hardest moments, simply present, simply unwavering, until the storm passed and her small hands found their way back to gentler signs. It was in those unglamorous, unwitnessed moments, far from any romantic gesture, that Adais finally allowed herself to believe that this man's kindness was not a performance for her benefit, but simply who he was. If this story has touched something in your heart, if you believe that real love sees every part of a person and still chooses to stay, then let us know by liking this video and sharing it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists in this world. Before we reach the end of this story, we have a special request for you. Comment the word kindness below if you believe, like Adesi did, that the right person will never see your family as a burden but as a blessing worth every effort to understand. On the day Obiora asked Adais to marry him, he did not go down on one knee in some grand rehearsed proposal. Instead, he sat with Zuriel first, signing carefully, asking for her blessing before he ever asked Adaisi's own hand, because he understood that this family came as one unit, inseparable, and any future he hoped to build had to include her completely. Zuriel's small hands moved swiftly, joyfully, forming the sign for yes over and over. And when Obiora finally turned to Adais, his caftan sleeve rolled up, sawdust still faintly visible on his skin even on this most important of days. She did not need Zuriel's guidance anymore to know the truth written plainly across his face. She had found in this quiet furniture maker from Yaba a man whose kindness was not a first impression but a foundation, sturdy and lasting as anything he had ever built with his own 2 hands. And she said yes with a heart finally fully unafraid.